Hey, welcome to the very first episode of the Mark Cool podcast. Today we're going to talk tiny houses, all things tiny houses. I lived in a tiny house that I built out of reclaimed materials for 8 years in the woods with no indoor bathroom, just an outdoor bathroom and an outdoor shower. Took cold showers in the middle of winter and had a great time being at one with nature and being an introvert alone in the woods. So I did that, and then we have three tiny houses on this 3 acres out here, and I had a hand in designing my mom's tiny house and also helping my daughter build hers. So I've got a little bit of experience with tiny houses and tiny house life, and we're going to dive in and just do a Q&A format here where we're going to just answer a bunch of questions about the tiny house experience. So let's jump into it. First question, planning and land is the first section. So what should someone look for when buying land for a tiny house? That's a great question. And I guess there's a few things you should look for, right? One, that you can put a tiny house there. Let's take this in two sections. Let's take it in, I'm going to be under the radar and not worry about the, regulations and stuff, which a lot of people do, or I'm going to go through official channels and get everything permitted, etc. So if you're way out in the country, a lot of people will just put a tiny house on a piece of land, which is what I did. I built a tiny house. I'm a carpenter. I knew how to build a house that was safe and, basically to code, but my own adaptation of code. I used some different types of framing lumber and different things. But if you're doing that, then the main things you want to look for are, that your land is probably not in a flood zone and that you can put a septic and a well there if you're out in the country, right? If you're doing something urban or on the fringe of a city, you might even get lucky and have municipal water and sewer. But if you have municipal water and sewer, then that probably also means that you will be pulling permits and doing everything through the county that you're working with, right? So the primary thing is well and septic, and then you want to make sure there's, electricity that's available there, right? If you want to run electricity, unless you're going to try and go solar. And then if you're doing permits, then you have to check with your local municipality and find out what is permitted, what they'll allow in terms of tiny houses. A lot of places now have tiny house initiatives where they're trying to encourage people to build tiny houses. So you just need to check with the county and find out and what's allowed in terms of square footage, in terms of construction, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go to question number two. That's not my question list. How do you find off-market land deals like you did on Craigslist? I bought this 3 acres off of Craigslist, and I bought it in 2013. Um, I just was looking for land, and back then in 2013, Craigslist was pretty well used. I think Facebook Marketplace has overtaken that. I think things even like Nextdoor. There's a site called Land Watch, and they have some, listings on there. Where else would you go? I mean, you can look on Zillow and Trulia these days too and find land deals that might be listed for sale by owner. Uh, and then you can, if you want to get really deep into it, you can check out some of my real estate investing stuff and or other people's real estate investing stuff and dig into public records of people who own land and reach out to them, skip trace them and reach out to them. But you can scour places like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, etc., and see if you can find a piece of vacant land that's for sale. And then what was the other part of this question? Let's see here. How do you find off-market deals? Yeah, we answered that. So walk through your seller financing negotiation. What did you say? So yeah, a lot of people don't get their minds around seller financing and how it works. And it's really very simple. It's just the seller is the bank instead of the bank is the bank, right? So in my case, I just said, hey, would you guys consider seller financing if I put X number of dollars down? My land was listed for 53,000 on Craigslist, and I honestly don't remember how much I put down on it. It was whatever I had. Maybe I offered them 5,000 down, and what I did was a balloon payment. I don't want to get too complex with this, but a lot of people are probably familiar with a balloon payment where you pay monthly payments for a period of time, and then after that you pay the balance, and mine was a 5-year balloon. So for 5 years I paid them, I think we amortized the full balance over 20 or 30 years. So I was paying a small amount, like $268 a month. And then after 5 years of paying that, then the remaining balance that I hadn't paid was due. You can amortize it over 30 years and pay it over 30 years or 10 years or 20 years. There are a lot of different ways to do it. But the main thing is just to ask the sellers if they would be willing to take payments over time rather than the entire lump sum. Some sellers will say, yeah, that's fine. I don't really need the money, and it'd be great to just have consistent payments coming in every month and make interest, right? Because if if I paid 53K for this and then I paid also interest on top of that, they're making more than the purchase price. So for somebody who doesn't need that lump sum right away, it's an attractive proposition to make some interest and just have consistent money coming in. Normally, you're going to have to put a little bit of money down to secure that agreement, but yeah, you can have lawyers draw it up, and it's pretty simple. I can, ask me questions offline. I can give you more information if you want it. Let's go on to the next question. Why are septic and well systems critical? What if land doesn't have them? I was lucky enough to buy a piece of land that had a mobile home on it. So there was already a septic and a well in place, and the seller of the land had gone to the county and gotten a perk test done to see about building on this land. And the perk test was for a 3 bedroom, 1 bath house, I believe. Maybe 3 bedroom. I think it was 3 bedroom, 2 bath. Yeah, it was. And so I already knew that it had that capacity if I wanted to expand, but the septic system was already on site and the well was already on site, which are huge things because a septic is going to cost you, depending on where you are and what type of septic, $5,000 to $8,000 to have dug and set up. And a well is going to cost you, similar, but probably a little bit more depending on your area, 5 to 10 to 15,000, depending on the difficulty and the depth of the drilling and everything. So if you don't have those already in place on your land, which is a huge bonus if you do, like if you can find a piece of land that had a mobile home on it or an old house that got torn down and it already has a septic and a well, and you can test those and make sure they're working, that's a huge thing. If they don't have those, then you have to make sure that your site will perk for a septic system. And perk is just a shorthand for, will the land percolate the drain lines that come out from the septic system? The wastewater needs to percolate down into the soil, right? The solid waste sinks to the bottom, and then the liquid will go out into a drainage field through pipes and percolate down into the ground. So they have to come out and test your soil to make sure it will perk at the proper rate to not make a health hazard, right? So you have to get a perk test, which you can do through your county, or you can get a soil scientist, a licensed soil scientist to come out and assess the property. And many sellers will have already done this, and you can ask them for that. If they have not done that, then you need to make sure you verify it before you purchase the property, because there are some plots of land that will not perk, and then you end up with a place where you can't have maybe a full permitted house, and you have to deal with things like composting toilets and gray water systems, stuff like that, which is, maybe you want to do, maybe you don't. Next question is, how do you research zoning and building codes for tiny houses? For me, this is very simple. Call or email your local planning and zoning department. Those people, in my experience, are always very helpful and very responsive. You don't need to dig deep into go down a rabbit hole of research. You can do that. And of course, AI these days makes that very easy. Go on to ChatGPT or another AI tool and ask about this stuff, and you'll get the basics. And then you can also reach out to your planning and zoning department, and they will answer any questions you have. They're always very helpful in my experience. What's the minimum acreage you'd recommend and why? I mean, for a tiny house, whatever you want to do, there's usually a minimum building lot size within most counties. For a tiny house, they might have a different requirement for that because you're taking up less square footage on the land. There are things like the amount of land that you can clear according to, county ordinances based on what's around you, if there are lakes and streams or, whatever restrictions they have. So there's an impervious surface requirement, like how much land can be covered by driveway and dwellings and structures and stuff like that. So again, the county will tell you what the minimum lot size is for your dwelling, but that's the minimum acreage I'd recommend, is the minimum lot size you can have to put your dwelling on it, right? and then leaving a little fudge factor for impervious surfaces, things like if you want a shed or a workshop or, you know, anything else that you might want to build. Um, Red flags when evaluating land. What makes you walk away? We touched on this a little bit, but if it doesn't perk, you don't want it probably, unless you want to do some complex stuff with gray water and composting toilets, stuff like that. Flood zones, normally you don't want to be in a flood zone. It's going to restrict the portion of the land you can build on or might make it unbuildable completely. What else? I wouldn't want to be near any things like a dump or a solid, waste treatment plant or railroad tracks or any things like that, right? That's kind of common sense stuff, but you want to think about that. And yeah, I don't have any big other red flags. You want to make sure you can do what you want to do on the property. So that's what I would look at. How much should someone budget for a land purchase? That's very specific to the area of the country you're looking in, but you can these days ask AI what's the average price per acre or price per vacant building lot in my area, and then you can get an idea based on that. You will find tax assessed values online on public records, so you can see what the tax value is. Normally, often you can buy from somebody for the tax value, but tax value and retail value are different. So you can look on places like Zillow and Trulia and get the closer to the retail value estimate for a property. And then, like I said, corroborate that with Google or AI and see where you're at. So that's how much you should budget based on how many acres you want, find out the price per acre in your area and then budget accordingly. Timeline from finding land to closing, what to expect. Normally you can close on land pretty quickly as long as the title is clear. So you sign a contract with the seller, find a lawyer or a title company to close it, depending on your state. Some states close deals with title companies, some close them with lawyers. And then once you've done that, normally it's 30 days or less, depending on the title work. Like I said, if there are marks on the title or liens or other things that can slow the process down, but I mean, you can close a land deal within 1 week. I've done it. Or you can close them in 30, 60, 90, 120 days, depending on, if issues arise. Um, I guess I should say I have a land investing business too. So I've been buying and selling lots of vacant lots over the last 5 years. What would you do differently if buying land today? Oh, I don't know. I mean, I really like this land and I feel like I got a good deal. And I actually don't just like this land, I love this land. So I don't know how much differently I would do other than keeping better records of the owner financing agreement because I think I paid them a little bit extra when I paid them off the balloon at the end of 5 years just because I didn't have really good records to see what I had already paid and blah blah blah. I probably gave them a little extra, but that's okay. Um, but yeah, I don't have any major what I would do differently. I don't have any regrets. Maybe I could have negotiated the price down. I paid them their full asking price because I really wanted the land. Maybe in hindsight, they were kind of sitting on this land for a while, and I know it had been on Craigslist for a while, so maybe they would have taken 50,000 or 48,000 instead of 53. So it never hurts to make an offer. But I just really wanted it, so I paid full price. The second segment here that we'll do is the building process, and we've got 10 questions in here, so let's dive into that. Where do you find reclaimed materials and what's worth salvaging? If you want to build with reclaimed materials, I had my best luck salvaging work sites, job sites where people were renovating older houses. So I was living in Durham, North Carolina, which is a booming real estate market where people are constantly gutting and renovating old houses. A lot of the houses are built from the 20s, 30s, and 40s. So I would tool around to job sites after 5 o'clock when everybody had knocked off or on weekends with my pickup truck, and I would see what was in the dumpster. And a lot of times it's really great old framing lumber, or it's beadboard, or it's cabinets that you can repurpose, or chunks of plywood that I could use for things. My entire tiny house was built from reclaimed wood. I had 2 inch by 6 inch, antique framing lumber, and I had antique, 2000 I mean, 1920s beadboard. I had 100-year-old doors and windows, all stuff that I thought was really cool. And the trim was all, 100-year-old pine. I made bookshelves out of a piano, like a cover for a piano. So dumpster diving is my number one. Curb picking also, like if you go trash day early in the morning or the day before trash day, sometimes you'll find, I took a pile of beadboard off the curb that somebody just, they had taken all the beadboard off the walls in their house and put it on the curb in bundles. I threw it all in my pickup truck and used it for projects. So, and also antique furniture, furniture like a chair with a broken leg or a desk with a broken leg or things like that. I take desktops or tabletops or things and make other things out of them. So dumpster diving, curb picking, a lot of people like Habitat for Humanity. That's buying stuff at a markup, right? Or paying money for stuff. I didn't really pay any money for the materials in my house. I got them all free. And then, just asking, you can ask around to contractors if you're friendly with contractors or if you go on Facebook groups where there are contractors. Hey, I'm looking for salvage materials. If you're gutting a house or throwing out stuff that you hate to see thrown out, I'm your guy or I'm your gal. I'll come and pick it up from you, that kind of thing. Or, you post an ad on Craigslist. I'll haul away your renovation stuff, whatever. Also abandoned buildings. I did some barns and other abandoned buildings out in the country where I went and pulled stuff. How do you approach dumpster diving and construction site salvage legally? I'm a rebel. I don't know what legality is or not. I just would grab stuff. If somebody's throwing it away, I'm throwing it in my truck. I'm there after hours when nobody's around, or I've often had the blessing of contractors or carpenters that I knew. Hey man, I'm throwing this stuff out if you want it. Okay, cool. And I'd go by and pick it up, right? So if you're concerned about it, ask your local authorities, can I do this? I would say it's better to ask forgiveness than ask permission and just go do it. And then if somebody says something to you, then it's a warning, right? It's not, that's my mentality. I'm a little bit of a risk taker, uh, but that's what I would say. What are the essential skills needed to build a tiny house? If you want to build it yourself, then have some basic carpentry skills or have a friend with carpentry skills or a combination thereof, like yeah, what are the basic skills? Framing, trim, depending on what you're building it out of. If you know plumbing and electrical, you can do those things yourself. They're not that hard, in my opinion. And yeah, if you don't have any of those skills, then either acquire them or acquire friends who have them or hire people who have them. Can someone with zero carpentry experience do this? What should they learn first? You know, of course you can do anything, but zero carpentry experience is going to take you a whole lot longer. So what should you learn first? Find a community college or someplace that has, courses on building or apprentice with a carpenter. If you have the time to take a part-time job and work with a carpenter or a remodeler or something where you can learn those skills and they pay you like a minimum wage or a low wage, that's a great way to learn. Help your friends with projects. If you have friends who are doing weekend projects or things like that, get your hands in it. That's what I would suggest. Walk through your foundation approach. Why 6x6 posts versus other methods? So this is one of those questions that diverges code and code compliance versus off the radar. I was choosing to do this off the radar when I built mine. This was 2016, before people were really recognizing tiny houses in our area as viable living situations. So I didn't really know that I was going to ever get a permit to do what I wanted to do. So I just built it. And I built it on 6x6 posts because that was easy. I just put them in concrete in the ground and attached my frame to those and then went from there. So why did I do it that way? I did it that way because it was simple and easy, and I felt like it would be solid. Got me up off the ground to keep me away from termites. And yeah, that was that. If you're doing stuff that's going to be code compliant and pulling permits and everything, then you have to find out what type of foundation is allowed by your municipality and proceed accordingly, which is probably going to be either a concrete slab or some kind of a, block, cinder block or a, brick foundation or something like that. Timeline for building. How long should people expect? How long should you expect? I think it took me 6 months doing it part-time on the weekends, maybe a few weekdays, and that's somebody who's highly skilled with carpentry. So it really depends on how much time you're throwing at it, if you're doing it full-time or part-time, how many people you have working, and what your skill level is, right? I think my daughter built hers mostly on her own. I just helped her a little bit, and she had a few friends help her with some facets of the project. She probably did hers in 6 months or so, maybe longer because she did hers part-time as well. But yeah, I would say it really depends on a lot of factors. Your experience, do you have the materials at the ready? What type of foundation are you doing? Are you pulling permits? That's going to take longer because you have to get everything approved and checked at intervals. And yeah, a bunch of different factors involved in how long it's going to take. What mistakes do first-time tiny house builders make? I don't know. I'm not around that many first-time tiny house builders. I've only done 3 of them here on my property. And what mistakes do we make? Well, in hindsight, given our current situation, it was a mistake not to pull permits and, do it by code, because now we're having to move these houses off site because otherwise we have to bring them up to the current 2025 code and, jump through hoops and all this stuff. So that's a mistake if you ever think you're going to want the county on your property in the future, or going to build something that's going to require the county to be involved in future pull permits, right? That's probably my biggest mistake. Otherwise, I don't know. That's a good question, but I don't have a great answer for it. Essential tools needed versus nice to have for a tiny house build. Basic stuff. I don't know, for carpentry, circular saw, jigsaw, table saw is nice to have. Chop saw, a compound miter saw. Those things are all good to have. And then, all your basics, hammers, and a drill, obviously a power drill with various drill bits and hand tools, a speed square, a hammer, tool belt is nice to have to hold your tools, couple of ladders, and I think you're off to the races there and get anything else you need. I like to have like a palm sander, like an orbital uh, palm sander to sand things down. And you can do a bunch of different grit sandpaper on that, and that's really helpful. Planers are a nice to have thing. You can use a hand planer or an electric planer if you're trying to shape boards to fit into place. That's a short list. Uh, how do you handle electrical and plumbing if you're not licensed? In my area, for projects under a certain budget, you can be your own contractor. So that's one way to handle it. When I built an addition on a house that I lived in Durham, I was able to take a test with the county to show I knew about electrical and plumbing, and then they approved me to be my electrical and plumbing contractor for a 1,200 square foot addition. But yeah, how do you handle that? If you're not comfortable doing it, hire subcontractors to do it. If you're comfortable doing it, but you're not licensed, check your regulations and see if you can do your own electrical and plumbing, if it's under a certain dollar amount, or if there are other ways that you can be your own electrical and plumbing contractor. What's the one thing you wish you'd done differently in the build? I absolutely love my tiny house. There's not really anything I can think of off the top of my head that I wish I had done differently. I did think of something at one point. I ended up taking off the roof. I used a bunch of reclaimed tin for my siding. And if you see pictures of my house, it's all rusty metal siding that used to be roofing. And I like that look a lot. I named it Iron John. But I used the same stuff on the roof. And then when I re-roofed my 4-bay garage, I bought some what do they call it? They're like closeout chunks of metal roofing, standing seam metal roofing that was brand new, but because they were small batches of different colors and stuff, I got them cheap. I replaced the top part of my roof. I had a gambrel roof, which is two top planes and then 2 side planes. I replaced the top ones because I did have a leak there, probably because I used the old stuff, and then I put the new stuff on that very top so I wouldn't use anything old on the roof. in that way, unless you're sealing it or something. But yeah, I loved my kitchen. Um, I loved the stove, everything. Yeah, there's nothing I can think of that I would change. I love my house. Uh, Systems in living. This is the next section. First question, outdoor bathroom setup. Exact steps from choosing location to finishing. My outdoor bathroom predated my tiny house. So I bought this property and it had a 4-bay garage on it. And so I used to commute here from Durham about 20 minutes to work on my projects, my furniture I was building and my various art projects and stuff like that. And so I built a little bathroom to use instead of just going in the woods all the time, right? So I have a septic system. I built a little like 5 by 5 shed essentially and put a real porcelain toilet in there that flushed into the septic system, built it close to the septic system, had a little porch on it where I put a couple of antique wash tubs that I had for sinks for washing your hands or doing other washing out paintbrushes, whatever I was doing. And then on the other side of the bathroom, the toilet enclosure, I put the outdoor shower. So yeah, so the location I put it close to the septic system because that was easy to run the plumbing drain into the septic tank, and then I was fairly close to the well pressure tank too, so I could run water over there for the toilet and for the shower and for the hand washing sinks. So that was that. And then outdoor shower in winter. How does that work when it's 20 degrees Fahrenheit? It's cold. I used to get brain freezes on from the outside, right? Like I have well water, so it's deep in the ground. So in the middle of winter, the water is ice cold, and I would take cold showers. I didn't have to take cold showers. I did that by choice. I did have a tankless hot water heater out there. I could have taken a hot shower at any time. I chose to do it because it was good for I judge it was good for my nervous system and my circulation and all that stuff and kind of a spiritual practice. So the only drawback to that was, and that goes back to like, what would I do differently? The pipes weren't insulated well enough, and occasionally my shower would freeze when it got down into the teens, and I wouldn't be able to take a shower there. But the cold showers, exhilarating, having the courage working up the courage to get into a cold shower when it's 20 or 30 degrees out, and then taking an ice cold shower for a couple of minutes and then getting out feels like having had 10 cups of coffee, exhilarating and incredibly life-giving. uh, Heating and cooling, what systems work best and why? I highly recommend a mini split, which is just a combination unit that does heat and air conditioning. I put one of those high on the wall and end wall above the refrigerator. I had a remote control for it, really easy, fairly cost effective. I think the one that I used for my tiny house was $1,000 to $1,200. My mom's tiny house was a little bit bigger, and I think hers was more like $1,500, but it heats and cools the entire space very effectively. So I recommend a mini split. I also did use, before I got my mini split, I had a window air conditioning unit, which worked great, but it blocked out some of the natural light. I had to do a little pane above it to get some of the natural light in. And then I had a propane blue flame heater, which really heated the place great. So after I got the mini split, I would use a combination of the propane blue flame and the mini split for the heat, which made it really toasty in there. But the little blue flame heater, the propane, you can do it with natural gas too. That thing was small, cost me like $100 to $120 on eBay, and totally sufficient to heat the house. The other benefit to that from having a gas heater and like a gas stove is that if your power ever goes out, you still have heat, right? Because it's gas based. So I liked having both of those for that reason too, because if the power ever went out, I was still going to have heat and I was still going to be able to cook because I had a gas cooktop. Water and waste options beyond septic systems. People do gray water, and my shower was gray water, right? I just only used Dr. Bronner's soap and natural products in the shower that were biodegradable. And then I had like a metal pan underneath the shower. The shower is set up in a deck format with decking planks and then gaps. underneath that, I had a like tin roofing, but angled slightly, so the water all went down away from the shower into a gutter, just a long chunk of gutter that I set in the ground, and then that ran out an outlet down in the woods, and that's where that water went to. So then it goes back into the earth. I've heard here in North Carolina that gray water is legal for things like a washing machine, a shower, anything that's not solid waste, right? So you can check that in your area and see if it's legal to do gray water. And then I had some friends who did a composting toilet at their tiny house. And basically, you can do a DIY, and I think there are a lot of tutorials about um, composting toilets online. You can buy them. I've seen them on Amazon. You can buy one already made. They're fairly expensive. I can't remember what, 700 to 1200, maybe more. But you can also make it yourself, and then you're just like basically lighting your waste on fire and burning it, or other ways to dispose of the solid waste, and then composting the whatever's left over. But those are options if you're not doing a septic system. Uh, Next question. Pardon me. How do you handle internet, phone, and utilities? Um, the internet and phone companies don't care whether you pull permits for your house or not. So I just had a Wi-Fi company come out and run Wi-Fi to my tiny house. Um, I had electrical power on my property, but I don't think the power company cares either. I think they're just going to run power to your property. And if you're pulling permits, then definitely, it's not going to be an issue. If you're going to build an off radar tiny house, you might want to have the power company come out first, I think, install service, and then do your thing. Um, they might want to come back and make your final connection to your house, or you can probably just get an electrician to do that. Uh, what else? Real monthly costs. Give me the exact numbers for everything. This is going to vary incredibly from person to person. I mean, my internet currently is $80 a month. The water doesn't cost anything because it's a well. Septic system, you get it pumped every 2 years for a couple $100. Propane gas, which I use for my gas cooktop and my heater, $400 a year, so $30 a month or so for heating throughout the winter and cooking year round. Um, and then after that, it's just your mortgage on your property, whatever you're paying. And oh, sorry, I didn't do electricity. Electricity for me and my mom in my workshop. So my mom's got a tiny house on my land, and my daughter has lived in hers, $150 to $200. And that's also with me running a workshop and charging a Tesla part-time for the electricity. And taxes, property taxes. You've got to figure mortgage and property taxes, right? And so taxes are based on your area and the value of your property. Maintenance issues. What breaks and how do you fix it in a tiny house? What breaks? I replaced the kitchen faucet. It went bad. It was a cheap kitchen faucet that I bought initially because I was doing everything super low budget. And I bought another inexpensive one on Amazon for 40 bucks or something. Um, what else broke in my tiny house? My tankless hot water heater died on me. So over 8 years, I went through two tankless hot water heaters, but one of them I bought used from a farmer out in the country, and that lasted me for a couple of years. And then I bought the second one used, and it kept running. So you can get those on Craigslist from people who are upgrading or whatever, need a bigger one. So two tankless hot water heaters in 8 years, and both of them were used. And I can't think of anything else that broke. So yeah. The roof, I mentioned the roof. I replaced some roof because I had a leak, but I started with used metal roofing. Privacy and security living in a tiny house, concerns and solutions. I don't concern myself with it living way out in the country. I never installed door locks on my doors. 3 acres and having a dog and being away from everything, not a concern for me. But if it's a concern for you, you can put on locks, you can get some kind of surveillance system, all kinds of options out there. I'm not going to go deep on that. What surprised you most about daily life in 144 square feet? Oh, just how easy it was to live in 144 square feet. Just everything's right there. Everything's very simple and very efficient, super easy to get my mind around everything in my space and maintain everything, clean everything up, organize everything. So I guess and that I didn't really miss bigger space much. The only time I missed it is trying to do yoga or a workout in the 12 by 12 space with my dog or something. But yeah, I was just surprised at how easy it was and um, how simple it was to keep everything organized. And yeah, I liked it. If someone has 10,000 and carpentry skills, can they do this? What's the path? I would say absolutely. And the path is find a piece of land or a site. Some people already have tiny home communities where you can probably rent a site or buy into the community. Um, Come up with a plan for your house. You can simply sketch it out. I mean, all I did was sketch out my 12 by 12 and where I wanted my windows and what I wanted to put in there, kind of dictated like the couch and the love seat that I wanted, the love seat that I wanted, the where I wanted a dog bed slash dog crate, the kitchen layout, refrigerator, a table and a desk for working, table slash desk for working. You can design it yourself pretty easily. There are tons of books and I'm sure Pinterest boards and tons of DIY tiny house shows that you can get inspiration from. So get your design together. You can have a designer, draw up the framing and stuff if you want to, if you're not comfortable with planning out how to frame the dwelling out. Um, there are probably programs you can buy online now too to do the framing design for you, the layout of the plumbing, electrical, and framing. And then after that, it's just gather your materials, create your budget, gather your materials and plan your construction and do it one step at a time, right? If you're going through the county, then you're going to have to come up with your plan and your design and your layout and then submit it to them, submit your building permit application. If you have to get a septic system or a well, you're going to have to track those people down. First, you have to get a septic permit. You have to get the site perked and approved for a septic system, and then you have to get the contractor to install that septic system. And same thing with the well. You probably have to get a permit and then get somebody to install your well. You have to reach out to the electric company to get service installed, and you can pull together your budget from all these things and get your permits with the county. And then once you're approved, get rolling. And I guess that's everything for this episode. So if you like this, you know, comment, subscribe, like, whatever. I've got a website, markcool.org, just my name.org. And I've got lots of blog posts about tiny houses and other lifestyle design and health hacking and all the other stuff I'm into, entrepreneurship, personal growth, mindset, functional strength and fitness, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, join me on the blog, join me here on the podcast. I'm going to do this weekly. Leave your comments, questions. Let's chat and talk about it. And see you next time.